Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act, known as the ADA, more than 20 years ago. The law made it easier for people with disabilities to get jobs and use public transportation and public buildings. There are many success stories, but overall, not very much has changed in the job market. 70% of people with severe disabilities are still not working, about the same as 20 years ago. The unemployment rate for people with a disability was 15% in 2011. That was well above the 8.7% unemployment rate for people without disabilities. The Census Bureau reports that between 2008 and 2010, people without disabilities were about 3 times more likely to be employed than those with disabilities. People with disabilities represented 6% of the civilian labor force. More than half of all workers with a disability work in 4 general occupation groups. These are service workers, administrative support, sales workers, and management, business, and finance.
Marion Vessels is director of the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, which provides training and assistance to employers and employees. She says one big problem is that neither employers nor employees with disabilities feel comfortable talking about a disability. Ms. Vessels says people with disabilities need to speak up. They need to believe in themselves to get a job and the accommodations they need to do the job well. An accommodation is an action taken by an employer to help people with a disability do a job. For example, maybe you need a wider office space so your wheelchair fits next to your desk. Maybe you need to use your voice instead of the keyboard to type on a computer.
Mark Bartlett has no feeling in one of his legs because of an accident. He asked that all the computer cords under his desk be placed away from his legs so his computer would not get pulled off the desk. Mr. Bartlett says, people with disabilities sometimes have to work harder and better to get and keep a job.
If you're bringing a skill set to the table that the employer needs and very few other people can satisfy that, then you have a much better position to make sure you get what you need to be, functional.
Mr. Bartlett became a specialist in making computer software accessible to people with disabilities. He has even started the Able Gamers Foundation to make video games easier to use.
Jay Schiller lost an arm and a leg in a train accident when he was a boy. Now he has what is known as a myeloelectric hand that he operates electronically. He works in a laboratory as a chemist for the Merck Company.
What's good about chemistry is that you really have to be deliberate in your actions in the lab and plan out what you want to do and how you want to do it, because you're working with some dangerous substances at times, and you really need to be calculated. Well, that suited me perfectly in that I really needed to think about how I wanted to do things with my new situation.
Mr. Schiller says employers must understand that people with a disability bring a special point of view and can be valuable employees.
Global diversity inclusion is not something that is just kind of a nice to have anymore. I think companies are finally realizing that's a competitive advantage.
An organization called Mobility International USA is working to make it easier for people with disabilities to study, travel, and work in other countries. Cerise Ross-Vinson is the Chief Operating Officer of MIUSA, which helps answer questions for those who want to travel.
Okay, what kind of medications might you need when you go there, and how many months' supply can you take with you? So we talk about the pre-planning, but I think to some degree it comes down to the individual's own sense of adventure and what I would call challenge by choice, which is how challenging or how up for adventure are you?
MIUSA has several programs to help students with disabilities in other countries come to study in the United States. But Ms. Ross-Vinson says their biggest problem is at home.
There isn't as much opportunity to learn English if you're a disabled person in many, many countries around the world. If they are not learning English or they're not progressing onto university, the opportunity to study abroad in the U.S., to even qualify for the programs and the scholarships, is limited.
There is much work to be done, she says, and some of it is being done by women who attend the MIUSA WILD program. WILD is Women's Institute on Leadership and Disability. This summer, for the 7th year, 30 women with disabilities will come to the state of Oregon from developing countries. They will attend 4 weeks of leadership training. Some of the women who attended in the past have become government ministers, members of parliament, lawyers, doctors, and activists for people with disabilities.